So what we're going to talk about here is why the world is fair and why we're all teammates and why we're all on the same page whether we know it or not. It's a big long page, but we're going to be going through two different concepts or two different ideas from the Kabbalah, which are, it's a teaching concept that gets people to understand what truth is and how to receive the light. The word Kabbalah actually means to receive, and you're receiving the light. And everyone in this world is a soul that is here to receive the light. And so it's why it's all fair. We're going to go through that and why it is that we're all working together again, whether we know it or not. So there's two basic processes that I put together just to make it a 9-step process. I'm going to go through it really quickly, and you guys can ask questions if you have any. But for the most part, I think it's pretty simple to see. Everybody in the world has basic needs. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so we have basic needs. What are some basic needs?
Food, shelter,
right, the basics. If you don't have those, you can't focus on anything else. And that's where you are. And that's fine, because that's what you should be focusing on. If you don't have food, go find food. If you don't have shelter, get some shelter. That's important. Everybody's been in that phase. In fact, we're in this phase every day. We need this. It's there. It's a part of the process, basic needs. Then there's a concept, which my words, this is all basically my words, you want to be able to protect your basic needs. It's called power. Once you have stuff, what do you want to be able to do? Protect it, right? So you could have that stuff tomorrow. So you can be sure you always have that stuff. And so once you've got your basic needs, you work on establishing an ability to protect those basic needs. Beyond that, you want a lot of those basic needs, right? You want a lot of the stuff, a lot of food, a lot of shelter, some really nice shelter. Okay? We're just incrementally growing from these basic needs to protect those needs and to develop a lot of it. And many people in the world are in various phases of this. Getting the new house, acquiring more stuff, whatever. Just part of the process, and we're also a part of that process, aren't we? We probably we at least have the ability to some extent protect that stuff. It's called locks on your door. And you have some shelter. And relative to most of the rest of the world, you have great wealth. Most of us in America do, relative to lots of other people. So again, it's part of a process. Once you recognize, though, that these three things don't actually fulfill you, once you get to a place where you recognize that this isn't good enough, I need something else, what are you going to do? Go after more power, more wealth? Yeah, some people do that. Billions of dollars, trillions of dollars? You're going to become president of the United States and Mexico? I mean, at some point, there's a limit. And the wealth and the power, there's really not much more you can do. That person begins to, or part of the process, is starting to look at the world from an intellectual point of view. Well, what's really going on here? Generally speaking, that's done from an ego point of view, which is, why am I physically here? Why are you physically here? What's all this physical chaos going on? This is ultimately also unfulfilling. This is part of don't eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay? You're not going to be satisfied by looking at the world from an ego perspective. If you look at it from your relative point of view, if you're black or you're white or you're gay or you're straight, you're male or you're female, you're young or old or whatever you are, if you're going to look at it from that point of view, you're also going to be unfulfilled. So the basic needs don't ultimately fulfill you. Having a power to protect it and having a lot of it don't fulfill you. And learning how the world works from the ego perspective also doesn't work. According to Kabbalah, when all of this fails ultimately, the point of awareness awakens in your heart. This is what we were all born with, Christ inside you, the Buddha nature, whatever concept you want to think about, you were born with a little bit of God inside of you. Once you realize that this stuff doesn't fulfill you, when all else fails, that point awakens. This is what it means to start to become awake. In Buddhism, the word Buddha means to awake. In Kabbalah, at some point, when you've already sought all of these things and they don't fulfill you, this other spot starts to awaken. That's when real spirituality begins, according to Kabbalah. Instead of looking at the world from a physical point of view, this is where religion goes, debating whose religion is better, and when you should go to church, and how often you should go to church, and how much money you should give, all ego stuff. Real spirituality looks at it all completely different. It ultimately crucifies the ego. And now you've started to go in a different direction, the true spiritual direction. That's a path that everybody is on, whether they know it or not. Now, these other concepts here, 5 more steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The double concealment is when you're hidden from God by 2 barriers. Primarily, 1, you don't believe there's a source. Or the world doesn't make sense to you. Those are both barriers. They both conceal you from the Creator. According to Kabbalah, that's called the double concealment. And it's largely what you're in when you're in one of these 4 steps. Because you're looking at the world from a ego point of view, you don't receive the light. Double concealed. You also don't believe in a creator or the type of creator that gains access to the light. You don't. You have this other type of concept of creator. And it's usually an ego one. God as a male. God as an old man sitting in a throne, judging us physically. That's all ego stuff.
So you have 2 sheets in front of you or 2?
Exactly. Double conceal. One of the concealment is you don't believe or don't understand what God really is. And the second is the world doesn't make any sense to you.
Because you're stuck focusing only on the first 4.
Correct. All you've done is spent most of your life looking for physical things. And so you won't come to a larger understanding. Good questions. So, what the goal is to remove those barriers or those films or papers that are blocking you from the light. The single concealment is when you start, because this process is so frustrating, trying to gain access to feeling better through physical means, the one layer gets removed because you become open to the idea that there's a God. And there's a whole lot of people that are open to the idea that there's a God. It's often conventional religion, but it's not especially effective because they're not understanding the world still. They're not understanding God's purpose. They're open to the idea that there's a God, but it's not sufficient, and it leaves them hanging a little bit because there's still misery, there's still suffering. When people ask God to help them, like cure them of their cancer, and it doesn't work, they're like, then God's not there, right? They don't understand. And the purpose and the method to the madness of the world doesn't make sense to them either. So there's still a concealment. There's an openness to God, and yet understanding how God works isn't there yet. And this is considered to be the opposite side of God, that God is involved, but God is still causing pain and suffering somehow. But we're still a far away from truth. It's in this process that the point awakens as well. Because once you've said, none of this works, I want to look in a different direction, I'm open to pursuing this concept called God. I'm open to pursue the spiritual self. Now this little spot inside your heart, which is ultimately the Christ in inside each one of us, is now activated. But it's a little teeny tiny baby. Worldwide, 7 billion souls throughout the world. All of us have the ability to do this. We're just on different levels of development. Nobody's better than anybody else. 12th graders aren't better than 3rd graders. But you can rest assured that everybody in the world is somewhere in this process. And if you see somebody who's specifically power hungry or wealth hungry, you can tell where they're at in this process. And you could also immediately understand they're going to be in at least the double or the single concealment. Okay? The next phase is called the correction phase, in which, since you're open to God, you start having insights. And you start shifting consciousness, and you start making choices, if you will, to perceive the world differently. I will forgive instead of resent. I will be courageous instead of cowardly. We work on the virtues, and this corrects our viewpoint of the world. I'm not a physical being. I'm a spiritual being. That's a correction as well. In Kabbalah, there's 613 or so corrections. There's a lot of work that we have to do. This feels good. This phase, you start to get corrected. You spent most of your life, most of your existence working on physical things. You perceive the world physically, you're going to get physical chaos back. That's the way the world works. In this phase, you start to realize God knows what he's doing because it works. Jesus' teachings work, Buddha's teaching work, Muhammad's teachings work, Krishna's teachings work. I have some examples of them up here, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Each of the different prophets fit right in, no problem. Because we're spiritually all moving towards this correction. If you stay frustrated and stressful and resentful, nobody likes that feeling. You will eventually have to come to a way to figure out how to change that around. And that's going to be done through your head and your heart. Changing the physical world again? Good luck with that. That's the correction phase. This starts to feel good. Now you realize God knows what he's doing. This is the single revelation. There's no opposite side of God. God's nothing but good. God's love the entire time. All of the chaos that you were experiencing was a loving God trying to teach you how to get to his level. It's a loving God getting you to correct yourself. In the Buddhist philosophy, it's called self-liberating luminosity, right? Self-liberating. Each person in the world has to do it. This is why it's fair. We all go through various amounts of chaos. Some people have more chaos than others. Is that bad? No, Jesus would suggest, blessed are the persecuted. It's probably good. I'm not advocating anybody go create any more chaos. But if you want to go through this process quickly, accept it, learn it, grow from it, recognize that everybody's a part of this process. You'll feel much better. It's true. God knows what he's doing. He's meeting you where you're at. He's providing you with the exact type of life experiences to teach you how to activate this point of awareness in your heart and get it to grow. We don't want to stay in first grade in spiritual school. We want to graduate.
But he's not directly intervening.
No, it's the system, from every chapter in the book New Eyes.
Right.
The physics of the world, it's set up exactly this way, that the experience of this matrix or this illusion that we're in, remember, every prophet refers to it as illusion. Einstein proved it's an illusion. This system that we're in is set up to have you have experiences. So none of it is bad. But the experiences you're having is relative to the way you're looking at the world. It's the beautiful thing of asking ye shall receive, seeking ye shall find. How does anybody get chosen in first grade?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand, right? All you have to do is ask. I would like to move through this process quicker, please, because the grace is offered to you from the beginning, way back here. Plenty of people in the world struggle with basic needs, right? And yet that doesn't keep them from moving along in the process. Because if they develop an awareness of, wait a minute, I can still experience peace and fulfillment in spite of all this chaos around me, they're also open to the light and the grace is automatically there. It's like sunlight, always present, sometimes concealed.
So it's not linear. You're saying you can bump back and forth, but you can be in single revelation while still struggling with the first 4 phases.
It's ultimately superposition. It's a probability thing. The world is set up in a probabilistic formation, and you can be in different percentages of this. Primarily, you're going to have one of these phases you most resonate with. To me, it's like a radio dial. You might jump back and forth, but you have a place that you resonate with the most. So for sure, you can go back and forth, no doubt. But people who are experiencing basic need issues could absolutely be in double revelation, no doubt about it. And yet, it's the fact that this stuff doesn't fulfill you. That's the important thing. If you find yourself in jail, or if you're struggling with not having enough money or food or whatever the case may be, is grace available to you? Mm-hmm. And it's those struggles that when all this fails that gets you to make sure you look at this other side and say, well, I need to go in a different direction. And many times it's the people that go through the worst of the basic needs that actually get there quicker. People who end up with a lot of great wealth and power, they'll stay stuck there for a long time. So you move through the single revelation, which is basically God knows what he's doing. You have an openness now that you've never felt before back in the single concealment. Single concealment. Back there, you are open but don't understand. In the single revelation, you're open and you do understand. Now you've got what Jesus says, trust in God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay? You recognize that it's all working to the greater good. Paul says all things work together for good for those who love God. It's that phase. You might not fully understand where it's going, but you trust it. Now that is how you receive grace. Now the light starts to come in. Now you're filled, the soul vessel gets filled with the light, and you can feel it. Why would you want anything else? It's actually an addiction ultimately, because you think about it all the time. I don't want anything else. That's what I want. Please correct me some more.
So right. Help me to learn from this situation.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And what you can trust is that the negative energy or the negative feedback is actually good because it's teaching you that you're pretty much touching a hot stove. You're thinking about it the wrong way. Shift your perception. When political parties argue with each other with a resentment, it doesn't get them anywhere, does it? But if they can be open to the idea of the way truth works, they can still have a debate. Again, I'm not telling anybody who they should vote for. But you can remove that negative energy in the heart that motivates us to do some horrible things by recognizing everybody has to go through this process. In Buddhism, the self-liberating luminosity, everybody has to get to that phase. The only way to the Father is through Christ. It's the same concept. We're all going through it. Negative circumstances are actually teaching you how to look for the light. And so then you're thankful for that. Now, doesn't mean the person knows it. The fact is they're largely robotic. They're just moving through the world based upon the energy. It's the last piece I'm going to show you here. But they're moving through the world based upon the energy that's in them. They don't know that they're doing this, but that keeps you... Trusting God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is trusting the system. It doesn't mean that the other person knows that they're doing this. but you can trust what's behind it.
The other person who you feel is harming you? Or?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Well, what was Jesus looking at whenever the people were crucifying him? What was he perceiving? Bunch of killers?
Grace.
Sure. He was looking for his opportunity to receive more light, and he was recognizing, forgive them, they know not what they do. They don't know what they were doing. But he knew what he was doing, and he knew in all things the goal is to take the Christ inside each one of us, just like the Christ was in Jesus. Luke 2:52 says he grew in stature and in favor with God. Well, so are you. We're all growing in stature and favor with God because you take your vessel and you get it filled with the Spirit. That's it. We're all doing it. And the more you're filled with the Spirit, the more you can see clearly. This moves you into the double revelation, which is recognizing, I'm part of God. You're part of God. We're all part of God. Everybody on earth is part of God, whether they know it or not. This is oneness. The Eastern philosophies are all about this. This is the absolute, complete, energetic, spiritual oneness that unites all of mankind. It's the physical stuff that separates us. Well, stop looking at it that way. Look at it as each one of us is developing ourselves spiritually. That guy might not know he's doing it, but your judgment of him keeps you from developing. Your recognition that he's a first grader and part of the process helps you recognize you're a part of a process, and it gets you a chance to teach. So, single revelation, from the way I look at it, is loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Double revelation is doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you. This is what Jesus' two most important commandments were. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So that's this drawing up here, okay? When you are filled with ego energy or physical focus energy, you're one of these. You're in, or even that, you're in the phase of looking at the world physically. That does not make you bad. It does mean you're not spiritual yet, but you're physical. We've all been there. We're all there. We'll be there some today. Not a big deal. Nobody's bad. But it does mean a different type of energies inside of you. Jesus would call it darkness, to be honest with you. Then there's the spirit thoughts, spirit energy that fills the body. When you look at it in the world from a physical point of view, your body gets filled with ego energy. When you look at it from spirit point of view, you get filled with spirit energy. This doesn't feel good. This creates stress. This creates depression, suffering, addiction, all forms of the negative energy in the world. Negative experiences of the world come from this, not from this at all. It comes from ego perspective. It's why the chaos and the suffering rules. It's why Buddha teaches in his first noble truth, life is suffering. Because it's really hard to start out in the world not looking at it physically. We all get taught it, we practice it, Hebb's law. Since we do it a lot, we get good at it. Now we look at the world in a physical way. Well, you end up with that kind of energy. When you start to shift, loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, your thoughts feed the body, ultimately, spirit thoughts. Different energy shows up. The Holy Spirit. It's a Zen philosophy, ultimately. And when your body gets filled with this type of energy, you have different behaviors as a result. There's a shifting that's going on. Don't worry about a speck in someone else's eye when you have a log in your own. That's when somebody's firmly stuck in this camp. That's really religious people who are telling other people what they need to do in order to get to heaven. And they say, you got to agree with my prophet or you're going to hell. When you are resenting, that's a negative energy. Does anybody like the resentment? Does it feel good to have that burning anger in your heart and you can't think of anything else and you're obsessed with it? No, it's a negative feeling. The only way out, the opposite of something called resentment, is forgiveness. And the shifting is an energy shift, which again starts in the head, it's consciousness, and you perceive, I would like to experience this differently. Let's try this forgiveness thing for a while. Anxiety is fear. Anxiety is when you worry all the time about things, that something bad is going to happen. Usually it doesn't, but because you worry a lot, it's an energy. All the teachings and all the religions are about learning how not to worry, to not fear, to not worry about anything, pray about everything. The ultimate idea in Buddhism, a bodhisattva is someone who is fearless. And it's to learn how not to have anxiety. Well, guess what happens? We shift energy as a result. And everybody who's anxious, who learns how to not be anxious, feels better. It's a reward, right? It feels good.
So 1 through 4 would be more fear-based emotion results, and 5 or 6 through 9 would be more love-based emotions?
The transition, absolutely. You're going from fear to love, absolutely right. From dark to light, from ego to spirit, absolutely. From the devil to God, whatever you want to love.
So 1 through 4, the positive emotions would be there, but they'd be more fleeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it eventually fails. because it's good and bad, good and bad, good and bad, up and down. This is permanent. The recognition of true self is permanent. It's a permanent condition. And everybody ends up there. Everybody crosses that line. And that's the place of peace. And when you're there, you don't want to give it up. You still do all these things. Again, this is not judging anybody. It's everybody's in this process through 1 to 9. Again, I put this together. These are 2 Kabbalah teachings. But for everybody to see, we are on different levels of growth in this. Emotions are a good way to assess oneself, but just because you're experiencing negative emotion does not mean you're bad, nor does it mean you're in a lower level. This doesn't mean bad. It's just a phase. It's a process. The challenge is whenever you're working on becoming spiritual and you find yourself around a bunch of people who have a different type of energy, you get affected by that. Now, if I'm around a bunch of anxious people, next thing you know, I feel sort of anxious. What's my job? Double revelation. I need to give the spirit. If I get affected by that person's energy, I just lost some of my spirit. Jesus says, like thieves in the night, they'll steal your possessions. You don't want somebody to steal your good spirit you worked hard for, right? Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart. Right? Got to guard your heart. Once you start to get filled with the Spirit, ego energy is going to try to take it from you. Forgiveness will help that from happening, for sure. But just because you start to feel negative or anxious or depressed or anything doesn't mean you're bad. It might mean you're getting affected by other people's energies. Just like energy flowing through or light flowing through a conductor or however electricity works, it just flows. And if you have a frayed wire or something, it won't work so well. But yes, it flows naturally. Light comes from above, flows through you, flows into the other person. You have the experience of it, which is awesome. You also don't try to take any credit for it. Jesus says, I've done nothing but my Father who is in me. When you get filled with the Spirit light, you recognize that you made one choice. You asked for it. Now, all of a sudden, your personality changes. Your behaviors change. These people sometimes look at you crazy. Buddha's experience when he got filled with the light, when he was enlightened, was he wasn't going to teach because everybody thought he was crazy. Nobody's going to believe this, he said. Muhammad, when he worked on his revelation, Muhammad's all about revelations. When he got there for himself, and he experienced it because he was dedicated to it, he literally said he thought he was going crazy. He said he felt like his heart was being ripped from his body. It was tough to come to the recognition that this world isn't what we think it is. It's Muhammad's teaching, right? Yeah, so people look at you different. And yet, what do you have to do? You have to hold the line. This process is a crucifixion. It's hard to let go of all this while you're still doing it. Because we still got to work on this stuff. But you have to make it about the light. When you are fully there, double revelation, then you are just a conduit, what Kabbalah calls a hose for the light. It's being male and spreading the light. Female is receiving the light. That's all it is. And so are we all male and female? Yes, we're all male and female. If you want to make it about bodies, fine. You're going to have arguments. You want to make it about spirit, it makes sense. Receive the light, give the light. Receive the light, give the light. Makes complete sense. So we're going to close with this. Buddha has a teaching about detachment. His first noble truth is that we are going to suffer. Absolutely, this phase is a phase of suffering. We all go through it, whether it's physical struggles and mental struggles, because we're looking at the world in an intellectual way. We got to learn how to detach from all this. We have to look at it correctly, because we cling to this stuff so much. We have to learn how to let it go. And when you let it go, guess what happens? There's an opening. The light can show up. Muhammad says there is no compulsion in religion, meaning don't force this on anybody else, because truth is clear from error. This stuff is obvious after a while. How much pain do you have to go through on this level before you decide to look at it different? And when you recognize that there is a point inside of everybody, a little Christ, a little Muhammad if you want, a little Krishna, a little Buddha, whatever, a little God is in each one of us. According to the Tao, the path, the Tao means path in Chinese, it runs through each one of us. That's inside of everybody. Once you know that, you can recognize that it's a process that you don't have to force it on anybody else because it's going to be clear to them. Anybody that works on forgiveness instead of resentment goes, yeah, that's obvious. Nobody goes back to resentment after they've forgiven.
Well, if you're forcing it on somebody else, then you're stuck in 1 through 4.
Yes, exactly right.
Because you're trying to control.
Exactly.
And that's a fear-based behavior.
You got it. And when religion attempts to do that, it doesn't work, does it? And even if it does, because it was fear-based, now the person just joined the religion because of fear. And now they're back in the single or double concealment. Now they're thinking God is going to punish them somehow. God doesn't punish, he just offers grace. He's pure light, he's pure love all the time. And he's only he because he gives the light. That's sort of important. This is not a dude in the sky. There is a giving force, and that's why it would be he. That's it. So yes, if you're forcing it on somebody else, you're stuck in the ego world, and now you're right back here. So you can tell when somebody else is doing that. At best, they're in this phase, and they got a lot more to go through. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Krishna, the Lord, is the highest self. Man's spirit, true spirit in this body. The Lord is the highest self. Well, we've been talking about in this group for years now, right? The highest self is your connection to the divine. It's inside you. The Lord is your shepherd. Krishna, the highest self inside you. Well, this is the double revelation. Your highest self, your highest level of cognitive ability, your highest consciousness functioning is the Lord. And if you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and I do it, we're all united here because we all have access to this Lord. And it's the true self. It's the true spirit in this body. These bodies are irrelevant, ultimately. The actual body is that type of energy that's inside there. It's the spirit that's inside each one of us. The illusion is this flesh stuff. Blackness and whiteness and gayness and straightness and tallness and shortness and fatness and thinness. How can I go on and on? All of those isms, irrelevant. Each person is having their own experience, learning how to tap into this light. That's it. And if we all do it, we're unified. And by the way, we'll think the same way. We'll say, oh, I get it. You're connected to the Creator. I'm connected to the Creator. But we're not these physical bodies. This is a temporary experience. I'm no more male than you are female. It's ultimately irrelevant. Souls don't have gender. Souls don't have race. Souls don't have sexual orientation. Souls don't have religion. But they do have one common thing. They're united in the spirit. They're united by the light. It's a process, and everybody will get there. Moving forward, none of us have to judge anybody else. It's a matter of saying, I get it. They're in a certain place in this process. They're not bad because of that. They're in that place. They're just part of the process, and your acceptance of that will add more light to you.
So would it just be a good time, if you're struggling, to pray for them to learn from their process so that you can surrender your emotions and feel better about what's going on between you and another person?
That would be a great strategy, yeah. The Buddha's teaching on this is the metta prayer. Ultimately, is if you think about a person that you see that either frustrates you because they don't understand this, or they're in a different place, or they seem judgmental, is he talks about having a hose from the heart as well, sending compassion out, right? Send that person compassion. Send them awareness. Send them forgiveness. Don't walk around all day, oh man, I wish that person were different. Say, I want them to come to the light as well. We could try this with a president. Pick your president. I don't care which one. Wish them well. I don't mean physically, because that would be right back to here. Wish them awareness, right? Wish them more sense of spirit. Now, if you do that, now again, you're working on this process as well. You're not stuck in the flesh. You're working on sending spirit out to other people. Now, that's double revelation. You are also have the ability to bestow, which is the Kabbalah word. We are here to bestow light upon others. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I would like you guys to keep me spiritually focused. So I'm going to try to keep you spiritually focused. That's doing unto others. That's what I want you to do to me. Please don't suck me back into the world of illusion and flesh and say, no, what it's about is making millions of dollars. Okay? That's doing unto others. I can do that with a president. I can do that with Congress. I can do that with black and white. I can do that with white supremacists and Antifa. I can do that with everybody in the world. ISIS, I wish them well right now. Not physically. I wish them spiritually well. I wish them access to Allah so that they can receive the light themselves. And then again, their behaviors would change. This is the only way the world is healed on the level of awareness. As Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world. Right? Thank you.